Afternoon and welcome to Techleap Office Hours webinar number 9. My name is Marian Spier and I will moderate this session today. The topic of today is why should we talk about diversity and inclusion during a time of crisis? As I said, my name is Marian Spier. I'm a founder, CEO, and consultant, also a board member, but this day is not about me, it is about you. And before I start, I want to introduce my co-speakers to you. The first one is Christina Calje. Christina, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Christina Calje. I'm born and raised in New York City. I moved to the Netherlands about 8 years ago now. My background, so currently I'm CEO and co-founder of a video intelligence platform called Autheos. And basically I've been working in entrepreneurial roles for the last maybe 8 years, 9 years. And before that I was in financial services. So for my entire career, diversity and inclusion has been a really core component of the leadership practices that I, as I got more senior, was thinking about. And also those around me, and it's just getting more and more important. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
Great, thank you for the introduction. Alexander, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, I can. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Alexander Ribbink, one of the partners at Keen Venture Partners, venture capital for growth, scaling companies, offices in Amsterdam and in London. I'm based in Amsterdam. Born in Amsterdam, actually, mostly raised in Amsterdam, but worked internationally for a while as well, but now back in Amsterdam. Career, venture capital now for the last 9 years. Prior to that, TomTom, and prior to that in larger corporates in a variety of marketing and general management roles. That's me.
Thank you, Alexander. So I believe this crisis is also an opportunity to change behavior, do things differently, and equalize the playing field. So I want to ask everybody who's listening to post all your questions related to this topic in the chat channel. We will try to answer them all. But first, I will start with the question. Alexander and Christina, maybe you could start, Christina. Why do you think diversity and inclusion matters, and what does it mean to you?
I think, especially for this audience, a really important way to think about diversity and inclusion, not only from a cultural perspective in sort of keeping a happy team, always feeling heard, always feeling comfortable in sort of escalating any issues that they might feel or ideas that they might have. Diversity is also a really huge, very hugely important from a commercial success standpoint. So this is a little bit what we used to talk about all the time when I worked in finance. I worked in different functions from private client services, where you're basically working with high net individuals, also coming up with investment ideas for institutional funds and private equity funds. And it was always really important to understand that the people that you're selling to, this is also very, very true for the technology companies, especially if you're selling directly to consumers. You really need to understand the people that you're selling to, and how can you understand the people that you're selling to if you don't have, because it is a very diverse customer base in most cases, whether that diversity comes from a socioeconomic standpoint, a cultural standpoint, a demographic standpoint. If you don't have that reflected in your team, the products that you're creating are also not going to be taking those things into consideration, and you're just not going to have a product that's really resonating with the people that you're trying to sell to. So I think for this audience, as you're mostly, I think, in a startup or scale up, still figuring out product market fit, it's super important to have that diversity of thought on your team to try to anticipate how your users might be reacting to your product. And even as you're encountering challenges or opportunities, trying to sort of interpret all of these different steps that you're going through at different stages of maturity, having the sort of diversity of function, the diversity of culture, that always will also help you to really be able to come up with innovative approaches, creative approaches to tackle all of those opportunities and challenges. So I think the most important thing is always looking at it from a commercial perspective, especially if you're thinking about raising funding at some point. Diversity is really critical to that sort of process.
Thank you, Christina. Alexander?
Not much to add to that. I think there's two things, and I think they've just more or less been said as well. I think it's the right thing because there is huge underrepresentation, and never mind which groups you take, apart from mostly white men, the rest is mostly underrepresented if you talk about our world. And I think it's the smart thing as well. I think it's proven time and again that diverse teams make for better businesses. So if a team is not diverse, it's a less smart business. I mean, I think that's what it boils down to for me.
Okay, then I have a VC. Do you want to say something, Christina?
Maybe just one sort of thing. I was also thinking about it a little bit in the last day or two, what diversity means to me, which is another part of the question that you asked. I think it also has to do with your frame of reference. So for me, diversity is not necessarily another ethnic woman being on the team, or ethnic person, or a woman, a white woman. It's, for me, actually, diversity is could be a white male who has a very different approach to thinking about the business. So actually right now I have a senior leader that's working with me on the team to think about commercials as we're entering into the US market. And he has such a different approach to me. He's literally a Dutch white male living in New York. So he's almost the polar opposite to me. But if you think about diversity, he fits the profile of the sort of standard. Especially when you're thinking up in the startup tech space. But to me, he brings this extremely diverse approach to thinking about sales leads and client relationships, whereas I'm maybe always thinking about the value that we deliver and keeping clients happy and having those long-standing relationships. He's all about how much money are they going to pay us and what are they costing us to service this contract? And those are questions that I don't ask myself enough. And the fact that I don't ask those enough is bad for Autheos. So having somebody like him who demographically you would not think of as diverse, the fact that my frame of reference, he's very diverse for me in terms of skill set. So I think that's another really important way to think about diversity. It's not always just about sort of the more standard ways of thinking about it. A big part of it is also a skill level and making sure that you have a team that really complements each other.
Thank you, Christina. Alexander, I have a question for you. Women and minorities do not have access to the same opportunities for financial and relationship capital as their male counterparts. We know the numbers, they have been in the news. This starting disadvantage means that during a pandemic, these groups are likely to suffer more. How can they get access to funding at this time because they don't have the warm handshake, where the only way to connect is online?
Yeah, I'm afraid the answer is online. I mean, for now, there's no other magic. Any other answer would be, either illegal or not the right one. The point is that everybody is quite available, however. So it is about reaching out. It is about I've had a number of introductions over the last couple of weeks. And so in that sense, in terms of form, there is no real good answer, but everybody's pretty available. No one's at airports, no one is in transit. So people are picking up the phone and people are looking to, make contacts as well, because everybody wants business to continue. So everyone who has a business wants it to continue, whether you're in the investing business or whether you're in the business of setting up your own company. So it is about reaching out. And there, it's to your point, it is maybe a little bit more difficult since some of the more classical events have fallen away. All I can say is that whether it's LinkedIn or whether it's the phone, they'll work and they're all being picked up and maybe even picked up a little bit better than before.
Yeah, and I just heard, I was listening to an interview by somebody was interviewing an investor, and somebody asked them, how can we reach you because you're so difficult to reach and during this pandemic? And then he said, you can also ask the person closest to me. That could be my secretary, that could be somebody within the organization who knows me very well and could share the information to you. So for people who are too shy to approach Alexander directly, go to the website, look at the people working there, and maybe there's somebody there you know that you can reach out to and approach Alexander indirectly, then flood
Yeah.
his LinkedIn account.
I also have the easiest phone number in the Netherlands, so and I'll happily repeat it here: 1234 0000. So
Oh, even I can remember
that's
that.
low threshold, right? There you have it.
Yeah, very low, very low. So I have another question. This is about female founders. I've seen a lot of them. I must say, I know a few of them who went bankrupt during this time, and I speak to a lot of female founders that are going through a crisis with their business because female founders raise less funding and they have to be more capital efficient. This experience is, of course, valuable during this recession. Me too. I canceled a lot of subscriptions. It also means female founders have much less room for error than their male counterparts, as they already operate a lean business. Do you have any advice for them how to survive, Alexander?
Okay, well, I'm assuming that what you're saying is true. I haven't myself seen, nor have I looked for the statements that female founders are more efficient with capital, and so I'm assuming that what you say is correct. No, I mean the only because I've never read that. I must admit I've never read that female founders are more capital efficient than male founders, whatever. So in that sense, I'm just assuming it.
It's Harvard research.
Okay, well, if it's true, I'm not disputing it. I've just never heard it, but I'm assuming it's true. If anything, it should stimulate investors to even work more with female founders, if that's the truth. And if you look for advice, if you're already very capital efficient, there isn't that much more advice to give, is there? It means that if what you're saying is true, then they'll survive better in the recession as well. The only thing, of course, that is then the challenge is if the reserves are not very, if there's not a lot of reserves, and in that sense there's no magic. Yeah, it's either the whole government subsidies point, or in the end it's about laying off or reducing costs further. How efficient? Never mind how efficient one is already. There's no magic here, and I don't think it's I'm not sure about the diversity point on this particular one, to be quite frank with you.
Oh well, I understand what you mean, but what I was saying is that they raise less funding than men, so they already have a disadvantage in managing the company because they have less funds, and they need to be capital efficient if they have less funds. So that is
but I'm not sure that's completely true. The fact that they raise less funds doesn't mean that when they raise funds, they've not raised enough. Yeah. So there's two different. Those are different things. The fact that fewer women raise funds doesn't mean that when they do, that they've not raised enough. If you see what I mean.
I understand.
Okay.
I think there's a couple of interesting dynamics in the statement and in the conversation. I think that if we want to generalize a little bit, I think that women are, and I'll also include myself in that bucket, that maybe we have a tendency to be not necessarily risk averse, but a little bit more moderate in terms of like how we think about our operations, how we think about in terms of how we fund those operations, and how big we want to get in terms of burn rate, and that manifests in the way that when we're requesting some sort of funding, how big are those forecasts that we're creating? How much growth are they projecting in there? How comfortable do we feel with putting in growth projections that, let's face it, a lot of times are, a little bit more superfluous or a little bit more based on air than anything else, especially in the earlier stage. So I think that's one. I do think that is an issue that women often face, in that they maybe are not as bold as men are at the stage of when they're looking for financing, and as a result, they receive less financing. Because they receive less financing, you have to be smarter with the financing that you do. I myself have worked a lot in the past with consultants, so that's a really great way for me to also be very flexible with how I allocate my capital. If I need to do more product development, I'll have more hours towards my developers. If I need to do more data science exploration, I'll hire more of my data scientists. But I think the question you're asking is how can we help? How can female founders or founders who are working with fewer resources better survive in this sort of a situation? Looking at the resources that there are. So one, I think Alexander already sort of mentioned it, thinking about some sort of layoffs or thinking about creative ways either to reduce people's hours if you want to prevent laying off people fully. Looking at all the government measures right now, Techleap, go to their website. They have really great resources. They're also promoting the bridge funding that a lot of VCs can co-invest alongside. So I think it's a lot about research as well. So being smart and thinking about your runway, how can you cut costs that will not hinder your growth too much? And having a plan if you get in some capital through some of these more support measures so that you can make sure that you are stronger on the other side. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Christina. I hope this answer will help the men and women with the diversity.
Yeah.
So the number one tip is research. Because I see that
that's a huge thing, yeah.
Because a lot of people don't research. They start immediately crying out loud that they don't have money. But first, I said, did you research first where you can find money, where you can find funds? So there are two questions from the group, and I'll start with one that's from Caroline. And she asks, out of curiosity, how many female-founded startups are in the current portfolio of Keen?
And I've answered that to Caroline. Never mind that we invest in scale-ups, but none so far, it says.
Okay, thank you. And then there is a question from Ineta, and this is, before the crisis, diversity was a huge topic and also a criteria when hiring new employees. Due to the economic slowdown, companies have frozen their recruitment or even downsized their team. Do you think that the diversity approach is also frozen at the moment? And what could we expect from companies in the near future?
No, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's one and I'm glad we can discuss it today. I think it'd be really stupid if it were frozen, because the reasons why it should be on the agenda are exactly the same as before the crisis. It makes for better teams, it makes for better decisions, it makes for better businesses. So it shouldn't be frozen on the one hand. On the other, we usually thought about this topic in the light of hiring. I think, given that this is a crisis and there is a little bit more firing than hiring maybe, it still is a relevant topic to discuss, because the same rules that apply for hiring apply to firing. It maybe you fire those people that are further away from you in whatever way quicker than the ones that you are in what other way closer to, i.e. the bias that prevents you from hiring is the same bias that may activate you when firing. And I think that is, again, we haven't discussed it previously, or I haven't given it much thought, but I think it's when now the moment comes to fire people, the same rules apply to be aware of your own biases when you make your decisions that are very tough decisions to let go of people. And then you let go of people based on functional qualities and not on any hidden biases. So I think it's a very relevant question. I hope the answer is no, it's not frozen, it's active, but unfortunately it will apply now as much to firing as it did to hiring.
Yeah, yesterday I interviewed an entrepreneur and asked them preparing this, and he told me, he said he invested so much in hiring a diverse pool of talents, but this is in the last 2 years, so all their contracts he had to cancel. So he has to go back to zero because they were all on the new contracts, and that is now, I think, a huge problem. But that's the more general point of the
crisis that we're going through, and the point,
Yes.
I think the point that Injeta is asking, should be, for me at least, the key point there is that, make sure that you fire as unbiased as you hire. I don't discriminate either way ever, and make sure diversity remains anchored as much as possible. Now, of course, in an extreme example as yours, where someone hire people and now has to get rid of all people, then the whole point of diversity is gone because there's only one person left, and that is it. So if he has to let go of everyone, then there is no diversity. It's all within your own brain at that point in time, or personality.
Thank you.
I think this can also be maybe an opportunity for, if you're a founder that really values diversity, and you've had trouble maybe finding diverse talent in the past. That's also a way to, a positive way to think about it, is that there will be a lot of talented people re-entering the job market, and to also be open to, finding new people that are you sort of keeping in your keep warm pipeline for when things turn around a little bit. So I think to Alexander and Marian, both of your points on making sure that as you go in the down cycle, that you try to keep these things in mind as possible, so that you're not in this very homogenous culture after the fact, is really important. But also thinking again about the other side. How can I take advantage of this sort of negative situation and turn it into a positive? There's going to be a really great pool of talent to draw from. So make sure that you're one of those founders that's reaching out to those people as quickly as possible after they have been let go, and seeing if you can seed some relationships for the future. And I think if you're on the other side, if you're not a leader, and if you're one of those people who feels vulnerable that your job might be cut because you fall into this diverse category, for whatever reason, whether it's geography, you're based somewhere else, or you're a woman or ethnic minority. It's also important during these times to stay connected with your management team, so that, which I think is kind of difficult, especially for people who don't feel so comfortable getting on these Skype calls or Zoom calls and speaking in meetings. There's a big vulnerability for those people who maybe are not as comfortable culturally within the team to sort of get overlooked. So try to fight past that that sort of shyness a little bit, and try within a one-on-one perhaps with your manager to try to get a pulse point of how they're thinking about your performance.
Great, thanks, Christina. I have a question from Magali, and she said, great insight. I see that the most difficult thing to tackle diversity and inclusion is the mindset, especially in the context of fear, like nowadays. What ideas do you have to change mindset, behaviors, and limiting beliefs around diversity? Big question, but
yeah. That's a tough one. I think, especially in the earlier days, there was a lot of discrimination happening of people against people within certain demographics. The discrimination could be from a more violent nature, of people of Asian descent that were sort of being lumped into this category of people who were, more likely to be infected than others. We saw a lot of that in the United States. And so that becomes isolating for people. It creates a real sense of vulnerability, which is hard to get through. As people are older people in organizations as well, maybe thinking that you don't want to be too close to them, you don't want to get them in any sort of, put them at any sort of risk. Ideas on how to change that. I think it comes a lot around trying to create empathy within the culture, within the team culture. That can be if you're a leader and you hear a comment that might be made in a team meeting that you expect could be found offensive or somehow off-putting to someone on the team, make sure that you address it right away and in front of everybody in a subtle enough way that you're not seeming too aggressive, but also make a really strong point about it. And also take the person aside afterwards, both people aside afterwards, the one who said this sort of offensive thing and the person who felt it, so that there is this communication between the teams. And I think that's going to be the best thing to try to create that cohesion and avoid those people who might feel offended or vulnerable in these sorts of times.
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, I think sorry. I think just to add to that, I think you're totally right, and I think those are the right ways of going about it. I think the key thing for me is to address it openly and then have a discussion. Is the only way. And so you need to address it. You need to listen to each other. You need to understand each other. You also need to respect the other person if he or she didn't mean or didn't understand that was being communicated. I mean, we should not. I would like to stay away from American culture in this respect. I don't think that has become. I don't think that's become as liberal as it should be. On the contrary, that's maybe not for now, but I think that's become a very punitive nature on this whole topic. I think we should try and keep it more open than what's happened there. But I think it's very much for the leadership, and whoever the leadership is, to be very sensitive to the topic and then be open about it, listen, and communicate amongst each other about it. I think those are the right ways about it. And a sense of humor if you can, because that is very important to continue to laugh. It's one of the things that I think has gone out of the American debate. Any sense of any sense of it being also just life in the end.
Yes, and I
smile.
I don't see you now. I don't know what. Or do you see Alexander, Christina?
I only see myself, but I hear both of you.
Okay, great. Well, and I also I agree with Alexander not to focus on the US-centric way of thinking about diversity, but really look at the issues that are in the Netherlands when we're talking about the Netherlands and VCs investing and startups and managing organizations. I believe also that diversity and inclusion is not just for one person. So what I see in the Netherlands most of the time, there's one person appointed to solve the whole diversity problem in a company or a country or a society or a gemeente. But I believe that it should be a shared responsibility. So responding to the question I believe that it should be a shared responsibility, not a responsibility for one person only, especially in the Netherlands. So I see we have only 2 more minutes, and I will.
Oh, it's fast.
Yeah, very fast. That's good. I have one more question from Rosier, and she says, "My mission is growing the number of women in digital technology with the goal to increase diversity and with that innovation. Until now, I've been investing myself in business and application development. Now that funding from organizations is on hold, I'm looking for other ways of funding, but investors seems to go for the millions of euros. The investment I need does not involve millions, but I do need investment to grow this platform. Please advise." So you don't need millions that's what Christina is saying. She doesn't need millions, maybe hundreds of thousands. And I don't. That means I think she's early stage. It's an early stage startup. How would you advise her to?
Well, there's lots of. I mean, there's angel networks. There are seed funds. I think again, if maybe she would be best advised to go through Techleap. And they have lists of networks. They have lists of VCs who specialize in very early stage. I'm assuming it's in technology, but otherwise also. So I think she'd be best advised to go there and explain what it is that she is looking for, and try and find a way there. Because I'm not saying it's easier if it's a smaller amount, but the world is a bit bigger if the amount is smaller. So. It's difficult in more abstract terms. I mean, it's too abstract to be more detailed. I need a bit more detail to see.
I think their answer would be research. That Alexander's also mentioning. Techleap is a resource to one resource to do that research. I think with especially earlier stage funding that doesn't require a lot of investment. There's so many different ways, and that always doesn't mean a VC. There could be angels, as was mentioned. There could be government funding. There could be crowdfunding. Specifically on the VC side, there's Fundright, which is also an initiative that I think Techleap is involved in, which basically is a collection of VCs that have committed to investing. Alexander would know better than me, but I think 30% of your portfolio companies should be invested in founders with diverse leadership by some 2024 or so. But there are initiatives. I think Fundright is a really important one to focus on. There's accelerator programs. Marian has Fem-start, which might be an interesting resource also to check out. But there's a lot of these. You just need to sort of research different organizations that are focused on driving female entrepreneurship, and I think that's probably the best first step to take.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add? These are the we almost finished. We're almost finished. Something else to say that you really want to share with this group?
No, I mean, all the entrepreneurs out there, good luck, because these are tough times. Otherwise, especially in these tough times, try and do the right thing and build a business that is as diverse as possible. And this is not indeed this is about diverse, whatever diverse means. It's not about gender, about religion, it's about a team that is not all like each other, I think is the key word.
Yeah, and I think at this point, everybody, every founder, no matter what stage the company you are leading, is going through has similar concerns. So that's also, it makes it easier to go out and try to cold contact another person in an area that's maybe an industry that you are also operating in or has a similar sort of business. I think it's time to be bold and just reach out to people, because they, like was said before, there's people have more time on their hands because they are around more often. And I think people are actually craving to connect, make new connections, just to sort of continue on like you're feeling living. So that would be my advice. Just try to stay busy, try to educate yourself, and try to make new connections during this time, because everybody's going through similar stresses.
Thank you, Christina and Alexandra. I think we are at the end, so we're going to end this session. I want to thank you all for joining this Office Hours webinar. Hopefully it gave you good insights. One thing I've heard a lot is research. Take your time to research, look for other ways to look for funding. We encourage all founders to join the community Slack channel, Techleap.nl, and there you can discuss this topic further. Goodbye.
Great, thanks. Bye.